in my head, even though it is a business, it will always be a hobby because it doesn't feel like work. I never had an ambition to do it. There was never a strategy to be where I am now. I always had my head set on being an architect, but it was only because there were so many opportunities that had come about as a result of just simply sharing online through Instagram and not knowing what sort of reception it would get, just through doing that. And in some ways, it's kind of good that it was a hobby to begin with, because if I'd have had the ambition to take it on as a full-time job 1 or 2 years in, I probably would have made a lot more mistakes because you've got to run a business as well. It's not just making art, it's a business. And if it's just a hobby to begin with, you can learn to make those mistakes with little consequence. They're all done, they're all handmade, they're all done with the typewriter. There's no technology that is speeding up the process or it's such an analog way of creating art. The one thing that people say to me is, well, you've been doing this for over 10 years. Does it ever get any quicker? A drawing from start to finish can take somewhere between, well, sometimes it can take a week to do, can take 2 weeks to do. There's been occasions where a drawing has been so big that I've spent a month plus 2 months, 3 months, depending on the size of the artwork. It's never any quicker. So when I finish a drawing and I start the next one, there's no shortcuts that I can make because you have to go about it in a very methodical way. You have to be very careful about which keys you're pressing. A lot of people assume that when I'm typing line by line, like I'm a human printer, but that's not how I use it. Because that would be impossible to do. The way that I use the typewriter is a bit like the Etch-a-Sketch. You're kind of going left to right, up and down. You're using the typewriter like it's an X and Y axis because you've got levers and switches on the typewriter that allow you to not just type left to right like you would a letter, but you can also use the machine to type in different directions. And so I won't necessarily start at the top of the page if I'm starting a drawing. I could start in the middle. If it's a portrait, I'll always start with typing somebody's eyes because people are naturally drawn to people's eyes when they look at a portrait of someone. And if you don't get that right in the first go, then you may as well throw the drawing away. There's less consequence of starting a drawing and making a mistake when you're doing a portrait. If you start with the hands or the clothes and then you leave the face till last, you're playing a really dangerous game there because you could get to that and suddenly mess it up completely. So, but yeah, there's no real strategy to making the drawings. It really is just labor intensive because it's all about hand to eye coordination because you're not just having to think about what you're doing on the page, what you're typing, but you're having to think about where your hands are, what letters you're pressing. It requires lots of practice. What I will do is puzzle piece drawings together. So you might look at a drawing and so many layers of text have been overlapped. So there'll be instances where some characters become indistinguishable. So you can no longer see that there's a C, capital C, because it's been overlapped with a capital D or a comma. But I've done that because I've had to interpret a shape of a particular subject, whether it's somebody's eyes, or it could be a park bench, or it could be a window in a building. And it's also dependent on scale as well. So if you're working really big, whereas if you're working really small, you're having to take really small details and trying to find an average. You're trying to say, well, what could that window be if it's a character on? If it's like a sash window, perhaps it's a capital E because that looks roughly like the shape of a window. And so you will see that as an example in lots of my drawings where buildings to a certain scale will have a capital E, symbolize windows, or roof tiles might be forward slashes with little underscores to create the tiles. And people say, would you write down these as instructions? So if you have to go back and make another drawing, and because I'm working on drawings all the time, there's no need to write anything down. You just sort of know, you sort of remember what works and what doesn't work. And I never planned to collect them. I was quite happy with just having one or two. But as people have seen the work online or wherever, they've contacted me and said, well, we've got a typewriter. It's only sitting around collecting dust. We know if we give it to you, people are going to give it a second lease of life, which is great. I've become a collector of typewriters by accident, as people have generously donated their typewriters to me. But of course, what that means is you get typewriters of all different shapes and sizes that come to you, different languages on the keyboard. So, for example, there's one that I have that has Hebrew script. I used to have one with Arabic script on it. Obviously, there's the music writer with musical notes, different sizes. So some are portable and have a carry case. But most of the time, I'll work with this big 1960s Olympia German typewriter. You sort of develop like a muscle memory. You become quite familiar to the weighting of the keys or how something feels, or the placement of the switches or the levers. And it's the same with using one typewriter a lot, is you become very familiar to how it feels. It's something that's been around for 120 years because I'm not the first typewriter artist to come along.
You do
There's
it
been many
very
before me.
you do it very realistic.
It's not defined by any art style, I suppose. It's never been taken seriously as an art style. That doesn't worry me so much. Once you start doing that, you try to compare it to other things. You try to say, well, it's a bit like this or it's a bit like that. I don't think there's enough of it out there yet. There's not enough typewriter art out there for anyone to kind of, sort of filter it down to say, oh, it's really like this or it's really like that. There's not many of us. There's a Facebook group. We all keep in touch. So there's about six of us in it. There's someone in Colombia, there's someone in France, there's someone in Germany, there's someone in America. It's really nice. And what's funny about it is we've all kind of approached it in a similar way. So if you look at other people's examples and you'll sort of look at their work and you'll go, oh, you've used that character to represent this as well. Or, oh, you've used to do some shading, literally just to shade in something. Oh, you've used the at symbol. Oh, I use the at symbol as well, so, which I do like as well. So it's really nice to see how different people approach. Normally, what I do is go to work, might be 9:30 in the morning, start working. I'll start working on a drawing. Obviously, I'll take breaks. I won't work solidly on just one thing all day and then finish around 6 o'clock in the evening. But it's a bit of a mix. It's not just that. I think people just assume I go to work on a drawing all day, but because I've got to run a business as well, it's creating videos because everything needs to be shot on video and posted onto Instagram. So I've got to edit the videos as well. I have a website to run to sell all the prints that are on the shop, emails, admin, replying to emails. So it's everything else. 30 to 35% of my working week is making drawings, and the rest of it is entirely consumed by. I haven't done classes for a long time now. We tested them about 2 or 3 years ago. I had an exhibition just after COVID, and it was at Trinity Buoy Wharf, which is where I'm based in London. And they have this giant shipyard building, and it was a big enough space to have an exhibition where I could basically have on display all my typewriters and also have lots of tables where people could sit down and use a typewriter. And so it was a really nice way of having a class where people could not only see an exhibition of the work, but then also get to have a go for themselves at being able to produce their own work. Nice. 2014 was when I started this, just a small school project. And obviously, 10 years later, in what has just been and gone by, 2024, I was celebrating a decade of creating typewriter art. And what we did at the very end of December, end of the year, we put together a London exhibition. It was like a retrospective of all my projects, particular drawings throughout the last 10 years that were of significance. So, for example, as part of the exhibition, I had my very first drawing on display. Everyone would say to me from time to time, oh, James, you really want to see what your first go at making a drawing on a typewriter looked like? Because it looks nothing like what it looks like now. What was really nice was the way that I had the drawing displayed was directly opposite that first drawing that I created. I also had the same subject but a revised version that I'd produced that in 2024. So I've got that picture next to the new iteration of it. And so people could draw comparisons between what 10 years of practice and trial and error can do to someone when they're making drawings every day with a typewriter. Having an exhibition is a really nice way to put a name to a face or a face to a name, because what happens with when you're working as an artist and when the majority of your work is viewed through social media is everything is just a like or a number. You don't actually see people's faces. You don't meet people directly, but there's a lot of people that might be following you, but you don't get a sense of that unless they come to an exhibition. In my head, even though it is a business, it will always be a hobby because it doesn't feel like work. nothing has really ever changed in the way that I still go about making the work from when it was just a hobby to what it's like now. There are aspects to making it run like a business, but it doesn't ruin it for me. It doesn't spoil it. So